train sounding loud, ride on the peace train.
He conquered the wild world of pop with heartfelt songs that spoke eloquently to his times.
Don't you feel a change coming from another side of time?
Essentially, I lived and breathed music. That was my life.
Matthew and Sam, the work's never done, there's always something new.
In the London of the swinging 60s emerged a fresh-faced young man called Cat.
Got out of the car with all these girls screaming.
Trouble.
But his early success was cut short by a sudden illness.
The doctor said to him that, you know, you only had a couple of weeks of life left in you. You would have been dead.
Oh, baby, baby, it's a wild world.
Cat climbed back, this time to even greater heights. In the 70s, he had 7 albums in the top 10.
And I know that I have to go away. I know I have to go.
But after selling 40 million records, he turned and walked away.
There was no more left in me.
I want to get off, is what he was saying.
I listen to the
His devoted fans were mystified, unable or unwilling to understand why Cat Stevens was no more.
Perhaps I'd better take a break. I'm trying now to give people a chance to have a bit more of an intricate understanding about who I am and what I believe.
Forever, forever, your lamp will burn.
More than once he ascended the heights of stardom. More than once he faced death. And more than once he was saved.
That you came with nothing, so with nothing you'll return.
In a relentless quest for his true identity, he changed his sound, his persona, and even his name. A true story of a cat who gazed beyond the shadowy alleyways of his upbringing into a new world. But while the writer's introspective lyrics may have pointed to his journey's end, the path he chose led him to a faith few in the West understand. It shocked everyone. The long road he's travelled began just after the Second World War, amidst the chaos of London's bustling West End. Born Stephen Dimitri Georgiou in 1948, he was the youngest of 3 children.
My brother was an extremely beautiful child, and so much so that we used to go out, when my mother would go out for walks and stuff like that with the stroller, people would stop us just to have a look at this beautiful baby.
As years went by, the boy grew high and the village looked on in awe.
His mother, Ingrid, was Swedish with a mild disposition. His father, Stavros, was a spirited Greek Cypriot.
He had a very loud voice, and he was always shouting for Stevie or David, and it really was deafening. And that's the kind of environment that he grew up in.
The area around his childhood home remains much as it was when the Georgiou family lived in cramped accommodation above the Moulin Rouge restaurant they ran in the West End. Stephen was pressed into service there at a tender age.
I was trained very early on, you know, to be able to work in the restaurant, to serve, to be a waiter. That's how I learnt to first serve, you know, the public.
Remember the days of the old schoolyard? We used to laugh a lot. Oh, don't you remember the days of the old schoolyard?
Stephen attended St. Joseph's Catholic School, where the nun's stern warning about the wages of sin left a lasting impression.
It was the awakening of my conscience. But of course, the messages I was receiving were both different. You know, one was in the church, was warning me, you know, about the fleshly pleasures of life, and the other one was actually attracting me towards it.
Oh, I can't keep it in. I can't keep it in. I've got to let it out.
Stephen was no choir boy. He and his best friend, Andrew Karitsas, often skipped school, running the streets of the city's seedier side, slipping into movie houses, scaling rooftops, and hanging around amusement arcades.
That was our playground, which was the West End, really. Quite dangerous if you think about it at that kind of age. But we experimented with most things, but yeah, we had a good time. Good laugh, good friends.
Now every second on the nose, of the city goes.
However, the vibrant musical theatre scene in the West End held a special fascination for Stephen.
I'd be hanging around the stage door, listening to the music and meeting the cast. West Side Story, you know, gave me a kind of a new vision of life.
Although Stephen's ambition had been to become a painter, he now confided in his elder brother that he wanted to chase a different dream.
One day he came to me and he said, David, I'm going to be a singer. I said, a singer? He said, you're going to be an artist. He said, no, I'm going to be a singer. I said, all right then, why don't you sing something for me? So he started to sing this song. I said, you'll never be a singer.
Yes, I'm gonna be a pop star now. Yes, I'm going to be a pop star.
It was suddenly an explosion, and there were the Beatles, who had opened up a whole new window of opportunity for kids like me, and all you needed was a guitar.
Oh, mama, mama, see me. Mama, mama, see me on the TV.
The teenager persuaded his father to buy him his first guitar and retreated to his red room above the restaurant.
I had all my records there, which were just by the side of my bed, so I could, you know, go to sleep while the record was playing. And it was, in a way, my own little world.
Soon Stephen was writing his own catchy songs at an inspired pace.
Baby, we're back to the good old times, and that's for sure.
A year passed and I said, well, okay, sing me some songs then. And he started to sing some songs. And I turned around to him and said, I think you're going to be a star.
His once skeptical big brother David was now in his corner and became an irrepressible force, determined to get Stephen discovered.
And I went to a restaurant right on the corner of Tin Pan Alley. I went into the restaurant. I stood up on a chair. I said, everybody, quiet, because I knew it was full of people from the business. I have a Gina's brother. He's a great singer. Somebody in here, please help me.
The first cut is the deepest. Baby, I know the first cut is the deepest.
His recording career didn't really get rolling until Stephen knocked on the door of producer-manager Mike Hurst.
The doorbell went, and there's this kid standing there with a guitar case. And he said, I wonder if you'd like to hear some of my songs. And I looked at him and I said, what, now? He said, yeah. First song he played was called I Love My Dog.
I love my dog as much as I love you.
I said, you're bloody great. I said, that's a hit.
All he asks from me is the food to give him strength. All he ever needs is love, and that he knows he'll get.
I said, by the way, what do you call yourself? And he looked very sheepish, and he said, my name's Steve. He said, but he said, they call me Cat Stevens. And I said, that's great. Oh, no, he said. Yeah, I said, yeah, it is. I said, why did he call you Cat? Oh, he said, a girl thinks I got eyes like a cat. I'm gonna get rid of it. I said, no. I said, don't get rid of it. I said, this is a great name.
Here comes my baby. Here she comes now.
Hurst quickly adopted Stephen, and within weeks, Cat Stevens was signed with Deram Records, a new offshoot of the Decca label.
From there, you know, Mike became my #1 man, you know, the man who's going to take me into the business.
Never could be mine, no matter how I try.
Mike Hurst took control. He gave Cat Stevens a new look and a big pop sound. In October 1966, his first single, I Love My Dog, bounced its way onto the British charts, reaching number 28.
Matthew and Sam, the work's never done, there's always something new.
2 months later, his next single, Matthew and Son, was a huge hit.
The head of promotion, Decca Records, comes charging down the stairs, says, "Mike," he said, "you want to know what our sales were up to lunchtime today?" I said, "What?" He said, 90,000 by lunch.
No one asks for more money, cause nobody cares, even though they're pretty low and their rent's in arrears.
Matthew and Son shot to #2 in the UK. Mike Hurst had taken a scruffy boy from London's West End and transformed him into England's hottest teen sensation.
I feel cold and I wanna get you by my side.
The attention was overwhelming, but Cat Stevens was in demand. He toured with an unlikely all-star lineup that included romantic crooner Engelbert Humperdinck and rock revolutionary Jimi Hendrix.
Engelbert Humperdinck, he'd teach me how to drink port and brandy.
Better bring another bottle with you, baby.
Other substances, I suppose, which I learnt maybe from Jimi Hendrix and that crowd. That was a very, very, I would say, taxing period on my health.
And it was taxing on Mike Hurst, who was losing control. Streetwise Stevens was steadily becoming his own man.
Perhaps lost a bit of my innocence very early on, but I never lost my conscience, and I think that was perhaps a very important point to my whole life, is that I was always protective of my soul, and I never really sold out to anybody.
I'm gonna get me a gun.
In a television interview in 1968, 19-year-old Cat Stevens gave the first hint that he was moving towards something much deeper than the standard pop fare in his lyrics.
It started with Matthew and Son. People said, yes, they wrote and they said, yes, you've made me take another look at myself, and now I can understand myself a bit more. The moment I knew that, then I sort of kept it in my mind, and it helps me now. I do try and philosophize, I suppose, a bit in my songs. I'm not very good. I say nothing of importance, really, but it's all fun, isn't it?
Is that, are you no more serious about it than that, really?
No, I am. That's only a joke.
In the blackness of the night, I see a shadow passing by from the heels of an old soldier boy.
Stephen did take his songwriting very seriously. Influenced by the raging social and political upheavals of the late 60s, he wanted to add his voice to the call for change.
We were living in a time of great change. Coming from the 60s to the 70s, the whole landscape was changing, and the youth were making it happen.
You left me wearing nothing but a shell.
Cat's health started to suffer from the relentless pace of touring, recording, and writing around the clock. He developed a serious cough and sought medical advice. In March of '68, he was diagnosed with tuberculosis.
The doctor that actually discovered that he had TB said to him that, you only had a couple of weeks of life left in you. You would have been dead.
The frightened 19-year-old was rushed to King Edward VII Hospital outside London, forced to rest. He began to meditate.
Lord, trouble move from me.
I really didn't want to leave this world without knowing where I was going. And that was where I started my search. Looking into the self, trying to find that place of peace where nobody could bother you, not even death itself.
And so my mind begins to memorize.
Left alone in his hospital room, he was able to contemplate the wild ride he'd had. Now he could finally follow his heart, a soul-searching exploration that would lead to some of the most introspective songs of a generation.
Can be oh so very lonely.
I believe things are destined, and the fact that I caught tuberculosis, was obviously, it was meant to be, because I had to have now a reflection. I had to get out of that world. I had to be taken, out of the limelight, into this country, in a hospital, lying on bed. I have to think about my future, about my life, about my purpose.
But I don't even know my name.
In the spring of 1969, after a year-long recovery, Stephen emerged with nearly 50 new songs, a new image, and a new attitude.
Steve had changed. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't I? Of course. But not only had he changed because of his health, He changed because he was a stronger person. When I managed him originally, I was the leader. After 1969, I knew it would never ever be like that again. That was the end for Steve and I.
Stevens and Hurst parted company. Finally, Cat Stevens was his own boss. He chose agent Barry Cross to help him realize his dreams. Free of his past and hungry to succeed.
As hungry for it as anyone I've ever met. I think he had to prove something to himself and to his friends and maybe his family.
I saw potential in him and he saw potential in me, and I said, look, if you get me a #1, I'll buy you a Rolls Royce.
Within weeks of signing on as manager, Barry Cross arranged for Cat to meet the respected founder of Island Records, Chris Blackwell.
He sat down and, you know, he played me a song. I liked it, it was nice. And he played me another song, and again, it was fine. And then the third song he played was called Father and Son. And I thought, wow, this is incredible, this song.
It's not time to make a change. Just relax, take it easy. You're still young, that's your fault. There's so much you have to know.
Just the way he was just there on his own with acoustic guitar, just playing the songs, singing it. They were complete. They didn't need anything more, to my ear.
With Cat Stevens now signed to Island Records, Chris Blackwell chose ex-Yardbird Paul Samuel Smith as producer to help realize Cat's potential.
I could always say, Steve, go and sit and just do the song, vocal and guitar, or vocal and piano at the same time. And that, you can build around that so easily. And that was always, for me, the core of our work together.
Paul and Cat went straight to work, drawing from the dozens of songs that Cat had written while recovering from tuberculosis. Stevens tackled each recording with unbridled passion and intensity.
Steve was a perfectionist in the studio. Having got the take he wanted, would then chase it home till 2 in the morning.
The album Mona Bone Jackin, released in Europe in April 1970, gave fans their first taste of the pure, poignant sound of the new Cat Stevens.
I think I see the light coming to me, coming through me.
Those songs in that album were very, very reflective, particularly connected to my search, my awakening, if you like, to my soul, to my identity.
My lady d'Abanville, why do you sleep so still?
In August, Lady de Banville, the album's first single, reached #8 on the UK charts. Since Cat Stevens was largely unknown in the United States, Chris Blackwell made a deal with A&M's Jerry Moss to distribute Cat's records in America.
He was a very easy cat. Had been through a bit of it before, you know, so very, very friendly with the record side people. Very easy to develop rapport with.
Then in the autumn of 1970, armed with little more than their dreams, Cat and guitarist Alan Davis set out to crack the American market.
Nothing could have prepared me for what it was like to land in New York and then 24 hours later be sound checking at the Fillmore East. It was terrifying. We were on the same bill as Traffic. We played for 35 minutes, something like that. Walked off, and the place exploded.
I wish I knew what makes me me, what makes you you.
Flushed with the warmth of the response from American audiences, Cat Stevens returned to the studio and began laboring on what would become one of the classic albums of the decade.
We were actually in and out of the studio, not all the time, of course, for about 7 months, which was much more like it from my point of view, because I'd heard that Simon & Garfunkel had spent sort of 800 recording hours on Bridge Over Troubled Water. I thought, well, it can't be proper unless you do that.
Then I found myself alone, hoping that someone would miss me.
One of the best moments of my life in the record business was hearing the playback of Tea for the Tillerman. I remember very clearly hearing it and hearing the first track and thinking, wow, this is fantastic. Then the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth. I've never ever heard a record as good as that.
But sometimes you have to moan when nothing seems to suit you. But nevertheless, you know you're locked towards the future.
Songs like But I Might Die Tonight and On the Road to Find Out. You know, these were songs which were reflecting, I think, a general interest in, which was in my generation, for more answers than we'd been given.
Cat Stevens was rapidly blazing a trail for the singer-songwriters of the 1970s with his deeply personal lyrics. But it was a more cynical song about hard lessons learned that would mark his biggest breakthrough.
Oh, baby, baby, it's a wild world, and I'll always remember you like a child girl.
The whole idea was very, very clear that, you know, out there is a world which is very, very difficult to understand, and it's not easy, so get ready.
You know, I've seen a lot of what the world can do, and it's breaking my heart in two, because I never want to see you sad, girl. Don't be a bad girl.
The song could have been a premonition.
Good care. Hope you make a lot of nice friends out there, but just remember there's a lot of bad and people.
Tea for the Tillerman was released in November 1970, and the album established Cat Stevens as one of music's fastest rising talents.
I'm looking for a
Cat was driven by the music and looked for inspiration everywhere.
He had like the hymn book that we all had at school, Hymns Ancient and Modern, a little small hymn book. And do you know this one? Because he didn't actually know it. He'd worked it out, he'd just read the top line and worked it out, and worked out the chords underneath it. And I said, yeah, that's Morning Has Broken. We used to do that in the infant school.
Morning has broken like the first morning.
Morning Has Broken was just one of the gems featured on his next album, Teaser and the Firecat. It included soon-to-be classics like Peace Train, The Wind, and Moon Shadow.
Yes, I am being followed by a moon shadow, moon shadow, moon shadow.
Moon Shadow, I call, you know, the optimist's anthem, because it looks at life extremely positive.
Oh, I can't keep it in, I can't keep it in, I've got to let it out.
I probably witnessed more natural standing ovations at a Cat Stevens concert. You know, sometimes in the middle of songs, that people would be so overcome. I mean, he reached people. This is a guy that could sell out Madison Square Garden twice, you know, 2 nights in a row without a record out.
Now, oh, I'm on my way, I know I am. But times there were when I thought not.
But the more adulation the star received, the more he withdrew. Like many in his generation, Cat was seeking answers to his growing sense of spiritual emptiness. He explored Eastern religions and New Age philosophies, topics he'd been interested in for years.
My search was going on at the same time as I was playing, you know, 40,000 seaters in Houston, you know, and that kind of paradox was with me. In a way, throughout my life, I had this kind of, you know, this ability to kind of cross thresholds.
Keen to step out of the mainstream, he left England and his usual studio team to record an album in Jamaica with session musicians. Released in July of '73, the aptly titled Foreigner sold well, but alienated many critics.
You say you want to seek the truth, but it's hard to find.
In early '74, a short-haired Cat took a break from recording and traveled to Ethiopia as a goodwill ambassador for UNICEF. His trek garnered much-needed publicity for the UN's project to aid sick and starving children.
No one to help you, your friends don't have the time. Hey, hey, hey.
Upon his return from Africa, Cat went back into the studio. Reunited with Paul Samuel Smith and guitarist Alan Davis, he recorded an album with a more familiar sound. But the title reflected a man increasingly torn between 2 worlds.
I was traveling on some plane to a gig, and I had my little sort of icon sort of Buddha statue thing, which I used to carry around with me, and I had a chocolate box in the other hand, so I said, look at that, you know. And if I was to die in this plane, you know, where would I be between the material and the spiritual?
Oh no, don't say those same idle lies.
But Cat Stevens was big business, and after recording and touring non-stop for nearly 5 years, he was exhausted.
I'm sure I was pretty difficult to be with sometimes because, you know, I was looking for my identity and I was a chameleon.
In his constant quest for answers, Cat latched onto another philosophy, numerology, which seeks to explain the mysteries of the universe through mathematics.
Why was I born a nine, cursed repeatedly?
The experience inspired the ambitious concept album he called Numbers, released in October 1975. It sold well, but was far from radio-friendly and worried the record executives.
At one time, Jerry Moss said it just sounds as if he's finding much more difficulty getting a song out, you know, because there'd be all kind of arrangements and complications, and then even the album graphics, everything became much more complicated.
In 1975, just before he was to undertake another major tour, Cat Stevens visited Jerry Moss at his home in Malibu. Cat decided to go swimming while his hosts were preparing lunch. As he swam beyond the surf, he was caught in a current and pulled out to sea.
Suddenly I realized that I was fighting the ocean and the tide was going that way and I wasn't getting any closer. The fear of death struck me and I suddenly held myself and I said, "Oh God, if you save me, I'll work for you." And at that moment, a wave pushed me forward and suddenly I was swimming back with all the energy that I needed. And I was back on land. And I thank God.
On that fateful day, Cat Stevens made a solemn promise that he would repay God for sparing his life.
I was just grateful to still be here. Because I was a lover of life, you know, and I still hadn't worked it out. And now I was given a chance, second chance.
Miles from nowhere, yes, I'll take my time. Oh, yeah, to reach there.
He waited for a sign. It came from his brother David.
He just traveled to Jerusalem. It was a mini sort of spiritual journey for him. But it's amazing that he discovered another religion.
I kind of almost tripped into it by going to the Dome on the Rock, which is the mosque there. I gave my brother the Quran because I felt there was something very special in the religion of Islam. He sat there and he read this thing, and he doesn't do anything lightheartedly.
And what he discovered is a faith that he says is more familiar than foreign. Cat was learning that, like Christians and Jews, Muslims worship the one God of Abraham.
When I first started reading the Quran, it wasn't a sudden, you know, bursting light. It wasn't like that. But it was, in a way, an immediate revelation that the first name that I read in the Quran was God's name. You know, I never knew that Muslims believed in God. One of the things that made me feel very at home was finding the names of all the prophets that I've read in the Bible. To me, it was just a new awakening. And things which I've been writing about, you know, come on now, it's freedom calling, come on over and find yourself. You know, I was now saying to myself, well, perhaps I'm being confronted with something that I didn't expect to find in my lifetime. You know, possibly the truth.
Come on now, it's freedom calling. Come on over and find yourself.
Cat Stevens was a man in the midst of profound change when he set out on the tour he called Magic Cat in November 1975.
It's not time to make a change. Just relax, take it easy. You're still young, that's your fault. There's so much you have to know. Find a girl.
6 months later, he played his final show of the tour in Athens, an anticlimax. Due to a scheduling mix-up, Cat performed to a half-empty auditorium.
And I know that I have to go away. I know I have to go.
I gave up, plugged out my guitar and just walked off stage.
Cat had been privately studying the Quran for a year and was gradually moving towards Islam. In early 1977, his spiritual journey continued when he traveled to Jerusalem.
There I was, in the middle of, you know, this holy city, walking into this mosque. And I think some Muslims came up to me because, you know, they'd had some problem before, people walking in and trying to cause damage to the mosque. They came up to me and they said, who are you? I think that was the first time that I said, I'm a Muslim.
Translated from Arabic, a Muslim is one who surrenders to God. He was about to do just that, but for a time, Cat Stevens would drift between the worlds of faith and fame.
I was on the road, sleeping between lorry lights, all alone, stone drunk and cold.
In April '77, he released Is It So? The album harkened back to his earlier work, but songs like I Never Wanted to Be a Star expressed his growing weariness with the trappings of stardom.
I think I see the light, not another beat in the star machine. Oh no, this time I won't go.
Cat's focus was clearly shifting. The 29-year-old immersed himself in the study of the Quran, and then Stevens came across a beautiful story that in many ways mirrored his own life.
I think that revelation came when I read the Quran, and it was the chapter of Joseph, the story of Joseph, the son of Jacob. It was his story that really opened my heart, and I started to weep. And I said, this is not the word of a man. This is God's words.
Allahu Akbar, Allah.
When I accepted the Quran was indeed a book from God, it was natural for me to accept the prophet who received this book as being the last prophet.
Allahu Akbar.
Then, in December 1977, he walked into London's Central Mosque and embraced Islam. Now a Muslim, Cat Stevens decided to change his name one last time.
I suppose the name that I'd always loved was Joseph. In fact, that was the first name of the school that I went to, you know, St. Joseph's. And of course, because of the chapter of the Quran, which really opened my heart, I said, that's the name. Later, my Arabic teacher who was teaching me how to pronounce Arabic, I told him that that was my choice. He said, can't you use the Arabic pronunciation? I said, yeah, why not? So, Yusuf Islam.
I remember standing here.
But Yusuf still had obligations as Cat Stevens. The appropriately titled Back to Earth was an eloquent farewell record.
But for you, it was just another night.
I was now able to make life my art. I now have been singing about, you know, doing so many great things and changing the world. Well, the Quran said, you know, to me, if you don't change what's within you, you can't change anything. And so that's where you have to start.
There was no more left in me.
Back to Earth was his coming down, his getting off. I want to get off, is what he was saying. I want to get off, and I want to be free.
Yusuf was realizing that he may have to sacrifice the career to which he'd dedicated so much of his life.
Being on stage, being highlighted, and being, if you like, the center of attention was in itself slightly idolizing. And that, of course, was opposed to what Islam was teaching. Gluttony, conceit, competition, envy, sex, drugs, rock and roll. So therefore, it was obvious that I had to readjust myself to my new life.
So in May 1978, Yusuf Islam announced the Cat Stevens era was over. It was an unprecedented move. No other star of his stature had walked away so abruptly.
Billy Joel once said that if the devil was going to go into business, he would go into the music business. The music business is about egos. It's about inflating egos. Islam is very much opposite that kind of ethic. It's about diminishing the power of the ego.
While his family came to understand and support his decision, Yusuf was now building a new life, leaving his past behind. Away from the limelight, he began privately practicing his faith.
He seemed to fall in love with the religion, and when it came to marriage, he was very wise in as much as he went along the route of the arranged marriage. And I think he had a couple of choices.
And I remember bringing them home to see Mum, you know, and have like dinner. And then after that, I asked my mother, you know, well, which girl do you think I should marry, you know? And she said, and she told me which one. And she was right.
Yusuf was married on September the 7th, 1979. He loved children. Over the years, he had made several trips to Africa and Bangladesh as the Goodwill Ambassador for UNICEF. So when he was asked to play at a children's benefit concert, he readily agreed. The thousands who came to London's Wembley Stadium on November the 22nd, 1979, witnessed the final performance of Cat Stevens.
It's not time to make a change. Just relax, take it easy.
It was strange, sad, and it was the basis of a great deal of my career, so it was a vast change for me.
I'd been very, very fortunate in attaching myself to a major talent, so for a while there was a sense of loss.
And I know that I have to go away. I know I have to go.
Yusuf dedicated much time and money to humanitarian causes. He gave up alcohol and auctioned off all his musical instruments, giving the proceeds to charity. His decision to stop performing was questioned from an unexpected quarter.
I said to him, well, I hope you will continue to sing. Oh, he said, no, 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 I have given it up. Why not? Why have you? Why have you given it up for?
There were times when I listened to a lot of people, even as Muslims, telling me which way to go. And I was, you know, I was a little bit confused because there were different messages. Because there was nothing in the Quran which told me that music is forbidden. It doesn't say music, thou shalt not play. I always took the safest path.
For Yusuf, the safe path meant abiding by a conservative Muslim view of music. If he was ever to perform again, he would use nothing more than his voice and percussion.
Eyes for Allah, nothing but Allah. Ba is the beginning of Bismillah.
In 1981, inspired by the birth of his first child, a little girl called Hassana, Yusuf Islam returned to writing. A is for Allah, a children's guide to faith.
He is very, very concerned with the blossoming, if you like, of an Islamic Western culture. And the best place to begin with that is within education.
What's your name? No, you know who I am?
Yeah, I know. Yusuf Islam.
Yes.
In 1983, Yusuf used his own money to create the UK's foremost Muslim school called Islamia.
I wasn't clever, I wasn't an academic, but I knew I had a job to do, and that was to teach my child, you know, not only the academic aspects and general subjects, but how to live.
His work on behalf of Muslim children pushed Yusuf Islam back into the front page, and he reluctantly became an unofficial spokesman for his new faith.
Moses was his messenger, Allah, la ilaha illallah.
Cat Stevens had vanished into the shadows. Now Yusuf Islam emerged into the light, but he would soon pay a high price for returning to the public eye. In February 1989, he was drawn into a controversy which, for a time, would eclipse a decade of good deeds. When British author Salman Rushdie was about to publish his novel Satanic Verses, it caused an outrage in Muslim communities around the world who considered it blasphemous, insulting God and his prophets.
I was contacted by someone saying there's a book coming out, and will you join a petition to write to the publishers? And that's what we did, you know, it was very simple.
The petition to stop the book's distribution failed. Then the already volatile situation was ignited. Iran's Islamic leader, the Ayatollah Khomeini, issued a fatwa calling for the death of Salman Rushdie.
I found myself somehow being pushed up to the front of the vanguard of this kind of struggle, and being asked to comment.
Within days of the controversy erupting, Yusuf Islam found himself in the hot seat. At a lecture pressed to explain the Quran's position on blasphemy, Yusuf, a recent convert, said that the Quran, like the Bible, teaches the penalty for blasphemy is death.
I was simply a new Muslim who had stated something which I thought was quite simple, and if you were to ask a Bible student, you know, what the Ten Commandments were, you would expect him to read that, and you wouldn't blame him for that. Next day, you know, the headline read, "Cat says kill Rushdie," you know, and I was horrified.
The media viewed his every move with suspicion. Appalled by the press's interpretation of his comments, Yusuf immediately released a statement to clarify his position. It read, "That is not to say I'm encouraging people to break the law or to take it into their own hands, far from it. Under Islamic law, Muslims are bound to keep within the limits of the law of the country in which they live, providing that it does not restrict the freedom to worship and serve God and fulfill their basic religious duties."
I think I was a little bit naive many times. Perhaps I should have thought a little bit more before answering. But then again, you know, I was expecting that people had good intentions, but it's not like that.
The media, however, ignored his attempts to set the record straight.
There are no words I can use, because the meaning still leaves for you to choose.
The most unfortunate thing about this whole episode was, I suppose, the way in which it separated me from my fans and from those people who had appreciated my words and my life and my journey.
He had to pay the price. From suddenly being the star, he had to become the anti-star as a result. He had to be the sort of reviled one almost. It just had to happen.
When I realized what was happening, I felt there was a time to get proactive. It became obvious that we can't just let others talk about what we believe.
Convinced he had to do something to promote a greater understanding of his faith, Yusuf decided to record once more.
His life ever shines as a symbol of light and guidance for all time and for all people.
In 1995, he released The Life of the Last Prophet, a CD of song and spoken word. The record told the story of God's messenger, Muhammad.
I wanted someone who was coming from a Western background, who knew very little or nothing about this man, about this religion, to tell them in 1 hour what it's all about.
Oh, the white moon rose over us from the valley of water.
I think he was recognizing he'd been a bit too stiff, a bit too rigid in the past, and that he really had to take a much more fluid position. It's not all black and white. In many cases, music can have many, many positive effects.
The experience was a turning point for Yusuf. Now he realized he could use his talent to educate and serve his faith.
Fierce fighting has erupted in Bosnia. There are said to be an enormous number of casualties in Sarajevo.
In the early 90s, the world woke up, belatedly, to the brutal conflict that was being waged in the former Yugoslavia. The battle lines were drawn along ethnic and religious lines. Yusuf had to do something.
It's unimaginable to see how some human beings behave, you know, with blind prejudice. Here it was, you know, in the middle of Europe, the end of the 20th century, another genocide taking place.
Oh, they've killed all the little ones while their faces still smiled. There was nothing to help them on the day that they died. No longer to laugh, no longer to be a child.
Yusuf Islam began a humanitarian project to support the victims of the war by sending food and medical supplies. That aid was used by people like Dr. Irfan Ljubijankić. Dr. Ljubijankić, who also served as Bosnia's foreign minister, traveled to England on a diplomatic mission in 1995. While in London, he visited Yusuf to thank him for his efforts.
This man, to me, was a brave man.
Before he returned to Sarajevo, Dr. Ljubijankić gave Yusuf Islam a gift, a song he'd written and recorded about the enduring spirit of the Bosnian people. Just 3 months later, Yusuf received horrible news. Dr. Ljubijankić was killed when his helicopter was shot out of the sky.
That was the moment when I realized that the song he left me was something that I had to now do something with.
I have no cannons that roar, but I have faith in God and love.
The song was called I Have No Cannons That Roar and became the title track of an album of traditional Bosnian music produced and financed by Yusuf Islam.
And I surrender you to no one else, my mother, Bosnia, my
On November the 15th, 1997, Yusuf took one step further and drew world attention to the plight of the Bosnian people by stepping onto a Sarajevo stage. In front of 10,000 survivors, he celebrated the spirit of their culture by giving his first live performance in nearly 2 decades.
Habib Allah, Nabi Allah, Shafi Allah.
Facing an audience again after 17 years wasn't particularly easy, but at the same time, because I had this wonderful support of people whose spirits were so strong and so vital, it lifted me.
How great the beauty of the earth and the creatures who dwell on her.
My religion teaches me to worship God and to care for the poor and the oppressed. And I think nobody's going to change my religion. So that's my work and that's my life.
How great
Today, Yusuf's work includes a spiritual and cultural media enterprise, still a creative force and influential to a new generation.
I use the development and the production of my albums, my books, to, if you like, express my art. And I'm very happy with the way things are going. Mountain of Light is my label through which I kind of express my artistic tendencies.
There's very few people of his sort of fame and wealth who've actually directed it to sort of something really positive. He's actually done a lot of real good things with it. I mean, he's not necessarily done everything right.
Cause I will learn to understand. If I have a helping hand, I wouldn't make another demand all my life. Whoa, whoa, where do you go when you don't?
After much searching, the man the world loved as Cat Stevens has found his answer, and faith has brought him a sort of fulfillment that fame and fortune could not.
Yes, the answer lies within. So why not take a look now? Kick out the devil's sin, pick up a good book now.
His is an amazing journey. A true story with a moral foretold in the enduring words he wrote and sang all those years ago.
I wouldn't see myself in any way slipping back into those old boots, that I used to wear, whatever color. But definitely communication is my business now. And I think that music is one of the forms of communication. It's an international language, so whatever will speak to people, whatever people will be ready to listen to, I'll be there, I hope.
God is the light everlasting. How great the beauty of the earth and the creatures who dwell on her. Here too are signs. God is the light, God is the light. I listen to the wind of my soul. Where I end up, well, I think only God really knows. I've sat upon the setting sun, but never, 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 never
I never wanted water once. No, never, never, never.